Our guest today is Guy Macpherson. Guy is a husband, father of two, and holds a doctorate in clinical psychology. In 2014, while working at a clinic in Northern California assessing and treating young individuals with early psychosis, Guy founded the Trauma Therapist Project with the goal of raising awareness of trauma and creating an educational and supportive community for new trauma therapists. The Trauma Therapist Project has now grown to include the Trauma Therapist Podcast, now being listened to in more than 160 countries around the world, and Trauma Therapist 2.0, an online membership community specifically dedicated to educating and inspiring new trauma therapists. Guy's focus is on honoring and cultivating the authenticity, vulnerability, and courage of trauma therapists. I've been on Guy's podcast 3 times now, and I always appreciate our conversations. He always says he wants to squeeze every last drop of inspiration out of each interview, so I'm happy to be able to host him here and turn the tables around. Guy, welcome to the show. Hello, and welcome to the How We Can Heal podcast. My name is Lisa Danylchuk, and I created this podcast to share deep conversations that encourage us to move through life's toughest circumstances. Let's get talking about how we can heal. Guy, welcome. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Awesome. Thank you, Lisa. It's an honor to be here. I'm excited to be part of the launch of your podcast.
Nice for you to be in the passenger seat a little bit. Let somebody else drive.
It's relief.
So you've interviewed over 600 trauma therapists by now.
Yeah.
So we're going to try to tap into some of that wisdom, download it for everyone to share.
Definitely.
But I'm really curious, to put you in the seat and on the spot a little more. What led to, even before the podcast, how'd you get into trauma therapy? Why trauma therapy?
Yeah. So the quick answer is, it's a story, but the short version is that I graduated high school, went to college, went to Philadelphia College of Art, what was Philadelphia College of Art at the time, for a year. I dropped out, started playing music, started writing fiction, and was writing. I spent about 10 years writing fiction, and I was writing about really authenticity. And I realized that I was writing about what I wanted to be. And I got to a point where I didn't feel like I was being authentic enough, genuine enough. Out of nowhere, I get this phone call from a woman I used to work with who was calling people to let them know that she had been living with AIDS for years, and basically she was saying goodbye. And I was blown away by her strength, by her courage. And at that point, I figured I loved writing, but I need to find my strength, find myself, find my courage. And so I went on this journey. I started going on these like mountain climbing expeditions and these crazy outward bound dog sledding things. And I went on a survival course. And in that survival course, there were like 15 of us who we didn't know each other. But one person on the course started really getting sick. And myself and this other person helped this person. We like dragged this person along through the desert. We were encouraging them. And it was like that moment, I walked away from that going, this is what I want to do with my life. I want to help people in that situation. Now, I didn't realize consciously that any of this had anything to do with my own trauma when I was younger, being bullied, and how that just jacked me up in my life as a kid in terms of my self-esteem and my confidence and so forth. And that didn't become realized for me, and actually until I did the podcast. But anyway, so I got out of this course, and it's like, I want to go to medical school. I want to help people. So I went back to college, and I had to redo my undergrad and medical school. The whole process was like not for me. But it was really interesting, Lisa, because as I was going through my prereqs for medical school, people would come to me and talk to me about like, man, I can't do this and da 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 da. And I would just like naturally like talk to them and I could listen to them. And more people were like, dude, you know, I don't want to hurt your feelings, but you shouldn't be doing this. You should be doing like, you should get into therapy. And I was like, I don't know. Anyway, things shifted and I went to school, got my doctorate, and I knew from the get-go that I wanted to focus on trauma. And when I got out of graduate school, I got a job in Costa County, working for the county. We were assessing and treating young kids who were showing early signs of psychosis. And, you know, not surprisingly, 99.9% of those kids had experienced trauma. And it blew me away how many even therapists and teachers and parents didn't know what could be traumatizing, what constituted trauma. And of course, it's one thing when you ask a kid and a parent, you know, have you experienced trauma? No, I've never been to war. I've never been blown up or whatnot. But have there ever been times where you didn't feel safe, or, you know, you felt unsafe, or you felt in danger, right? Those questions open up a whole other network. And it's like, I realized I needed to do something. And really, that's what it was. And during my commuting, I was listening to other podcasts about entrepreneurs who were doing these incredible things with their lives. And I was like, I want to do this. I want to start a podcast. I want to interview like who I thought were master therapists, you know, and bring them on and help other people like myself learn about trauma. And that's how I started.
Yeah, that's amazing. I love there's like a depth and a yearning for truth that I hear in those early, you know, helping someone in this sounds like a life or death experience, right? You're right in there with them. And then here you are in medical school going, everyone's coming to me. And I smile when you say that, because I feel like so many therapists are just like, why do people in the grocery store line just tell me like, there's just some sort of magnetic thing where people, I think, feel safe, right? And sometimes they're kind of caught off guard, like, why am I telling you all of this?
And it was honestly, that's just I am more interested in the story, the process.
Yeah.
You know, it's funny because when I was going through the medical prereqs, I put together a workshop for kind of non-traditional students. I was considered a non-traditional student going back to school at 36. Put together a workshop for people who were interested in becoming physicians. So put a whole workshop together. And so here I was spending time doing that, right? As opposed to successfully getting into medical school.
Yep.
But
early signs
that I didn't see.
Yeah, but then you look back and they all make perfect sense, right?
Yeah.
So when you look back at starting the podcast, it sounds like you were listening to podcasts, you were absorbing all this information and it was going somewhere, and then you just got this hit like, okay, I want to do a podcast. Do you see now in retrospect, is there anything else that you were wanting or needing or creating out of that now 600 episodes in, you can kind of go, oh, okay, this was going on too?
Well, I think it was coming to terms with my own trauma experience, understanding it, being able to talk about it and confront it and understand how that's impacted me.
Mm-hmm.
And I only got there really through talking to my guests and hearing them share their own experiences. Mm. And it, in turn, I know it gave me the courage to talk about my own experience. Despite the fact that I had been in therapy and talked about it, but not really understanding, or I think even wanting to admit how much it impacted me.
Yeah. I think it's important that you bring up bullying too, because this is something whenever I'm offering training and we talk about the diagnostic criteria for PTSD, I always offer this aside of like, often social experiences that feel threatening follow
Right.
the same pattern, right? Where it might not seem to be life or death, but if you're in third grade in the lunch line, that kind of does feel like life or death. Or if you're in middle school and a certain group cuts you out, or somebody says something, spreads a rumor, like that can feel like social isolation, which for our species is a threat of death, right?
Definitely.
And so I often will bring that in, and I think it's important you mention that, because people, I don't know if in your 600 interviews how this conversation has evolved, but I know around me the people are sort of steering away from the big T, small t, because it's like, well, it's a T. Like, what is it to you?
Exactly. And that was one of the points I think I realized and tried to help other people. As part of our job, that first job I had at that clinic, we had to do these take these calls from parents and teachers and other therapists to see if they wanted to call the clinic and see if their kid was right for the program.
Mm-hmm.
So we would go through this list of questions, and one of the questions was, basically, have you experienced, or has the child experienced trauma? But of course, kind of educating them to understand everything that could be traumatizing. And what's, traumatizing for one person, of course, isn't necessarily going to be traumatizing for another person. And that was a big eye-opening thing for a lot of people. And that's where we get into the big T, little t. Well, great. It's a little t for you, but it screwed up my life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And just looking at the impact of that and how it carries, right? How it carries forward. So you've interviewed over 600 master trauma therapists at this point, and I'd imagine there's a lot of aha moments in there. What stands out to you as maybe some themes or commonalities? Like, what do you hear over and over and over again that maybe now has become like a norm for you, but still might not be in the field or in the way people think about trauma or mental health?
Right. Yeah, that's a good one. When I first started, Lisa, I knew I wanted to get into the story. I knew I didn't necessarily want to have people come on and say, okay, I work this way and this way and this way. And one of the questions I started asking right off the bat was if they could share early experiences or early errors or mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
And even though some people are like, well, I don't make mistakes, or
Right.
I thought it was going to hear, this intervention didn't work or that intervention didn't work. But what came out was a lot of therapists talking about their own inability at that moment to be themselves or to be vulnerable or to allow themselves to connect. And they talked about their experiences that had impacted that. And that really was eye-opening to me, because I got into when I got into school, so much of it for me was, I need to learn this intervention. Yeah. What book do I need to read? What workshop do I need to attend? What course? And I thought I had the relational stuff, the personal stuff, the personal growth stuff figured out.
Yeah.
And I was so naive, and I didn't understand how crucial and vital that was to, especially therapy across the board, of course, but working with people who'd been impacted by trauma, definitely. And that in turn has really become the driving force of what I do. Allowing or encouraging and inspiring listeners to be okay with who they are and somehow get that into the work they do. Mm-hmm. And of course, it's not always easy, because when you're talking to a lot of therapists and you say, or you offer to them, okay, a really important integral component of this is, doing your own work. And they're like, what?
Mm-hmm.
Wait a minute, I'm here to fix, I want to help that person over there. It somehow takes the onus off of them, takes the spotlight off of them.
Yeah.
But understanding that you can't escape that light. You have to, be willing to do that.
Yeah. And it just makes me think of kind of what people might call the shadow side of therapy, which is being in more the martyr position or the codependent or the helping to the point of losing yourself and not valuing your own needs. And a lot of conversations along these lines in vicarious trauma and burnout and compassion fatigue. And people start to sort of come back and go, wait, where do I end and the other person begins and all of that. And so the doing your own work piece serves sustainability, but I'm with you on this, and I believe that it really serves the work in the moment. Like if you can be yourself and be 100%, however much you're aware of, 90 whatever percent authentic, right. You can just be with whatever's happening and have all the training and all the books and all the tools there, but they're not necessarily, they're not in center stage. There's something you reach in and pull something out of and go, oh, well, does this apply here? Does this apply here? Or, oh, let's go down this path for a little while. It seems like that's going to help. But really, so many studies come back to the relationship. And I love how, I listened to one of your recent podcasts where you talked about vulnerability too. And it's just like really coming back to that. This is being with that other person. They're showing up in their full vulnerability. They're, coming in and maybe talking about something really shameful or upsetting or hurtful that happened. And then if we're feeling very professional and guarded and cold, then it's not really going to flow. But if we can really be like, okay, well, this is who I am and how much I've worked on myself and how I'm feeling today. And I'm just going to be that. I think that sets a tone of safety.
I totally agree. And that's exactly what I didn't get when I first started. And certainly when I first started seeing clients early on, I led with that, my briefcase full of interventions, as naive and limited as that supply was. I needed to go in there and, as I think a lot of young therapists do, you need to prove or want to prove yourself. And I certainly did. Not that I was this robot, but I was a therapist. I was that ideal of what I thought a therapist should be. And I didn't open the door to myself. I didn't think that was as important as knowing, Pat Ogden's book and page 222 of her book and memorizing Bessel van der Kolk's page 99 and having all those interventions. Just interviewing people and hearing them and hearing them talk about how important being in the moment, being able to be in the moment as yourself authentically with someone who's experienced interpersonal trauma and understanding the value of that is how powerful that was and how it's not always easy to do. Yeah. It's not always easy to do and then this is where the art of therapy comes in, right? You talked about having all that knowledge, yes, but knowing when to use it. Yeah. Being able to be in the moment and be cognizant of that relationship while also saying, wait, this intervention can be utilized right now, And then the application of that, right? Like actually bringing that into someone who, to the degree you've gotten to know, might really like this aspect of it and be averse to the other aspect or be sensitive to how you frame it and all these things, right? So there's definitely that art there. And it's funny, as you're talking, I'm thinking about how much this applies to the yoga world, which I'm very steeped into in terms of, a lot of yoga teachers will ask me, well, what do I do if someone, gets triggered in class? And I'm like, well, let me tell you, if you've been teaching yoga for any amount of time, people have been triggered in your class already. It doesn't always look one way, but there's a fear that something big will happen. And then the teacher's anxiety sort of takes over the show, right? So it's great to be able to just give a few, hey, here's some tools, put them in your bag, and then self-regulate. So that you don't go into a panic because someone in your room is, having a flashback or doing something that's more demonstrative. I think people tend to think a trigger is going to look like a panic attack, and it can, but it looks like a lot of different things, right? So that ability to have tools and then to just be with yourself and to be, regulated with another person who may be having all kinds of different experiences. Like all of that is just so much better than like, hold on, page 222 says that we should not triangulate, but we should pendulate, right? Like, what is somebody's going to be like, what are you
are you talking about there?
Yeah. And it's funny because, doing these interviews, I got to a point where certain people, many people stood out in how seriously they took that level of self-awareness and what they did to cultivate that and to practice that. And it just blew me away. And because I got to a point where I would hear people talk about the importance of allowing oneself, or getting to a point where you could allow yourself to be open and vulnerable in that moment. But understanding that it took work to get, and constant, it's like a practice to get there. It gave me a big new realization of the quality of interpersonal relationships.
Yeah. So what do you, maybe this is from guests on your show, maybe this is just your practice, but how do you practice that? Like if someone's listening and like, oh, I want to become a therapist, or, I just want to help this person in my life more. And you're talking about this authenticity and doing my own work. Like, what does that mean? What does that look like?
Right.
And I think that evolves over time. So maybe what does that look like for you at this point?
I asked that question to one of my guests, and they came up with what I thought was a brilliant response. And they said, and I ascribe to this too, they practice in their current relationships.
Yeah.
With their partner, with their kids. And what does that mean? That means being aware of what's coming up for you moment to moment, being aware of your body states, your mental states, your emotional states, how you're being dysregulated when I'm talking to my kids. And it's really, really challenging. Yeah. It's really hard.
I'm just like feeling it as you're talking. I'm like, oh yeah. Oh, it's so much ongoing work, right?
It's a practice, and being willing to do that, and being willing to look at what it takes to not fix that, but to work with that. Yeah. To shift areas that need to be shifted. Mm-hmm. It means being willing to look at your story and the hills and valleys of your story, and to explore that, to work through that, to recognize your triggers, to look at your traumas, to look at how bullying has impacted me and the way it impacted me when I was seeing clients, right? When that topic would come up, I would be like triggered and immediately go to like problem solving mode and being able to do that with who you are as a person, and getting to a point where you're okay with that. You're comfortable with those different aspects of yourself.
Yeah.
I think I think a lot of times, I know myself, certainly when I was just starting out as a therapist, there's a tendency to carry the relationship of yourself and your client like it's this very fragile glass ball. Mm-hmm. And oh my gosh, something's going to happen. If I make a mistake, it's going to crash, or if I move, it's going to crash, as opposed to this incredible chunk of clay.
Yes.
That's going to get squished and marred and dented, but that's awesome because that just represents the movement and wondrousness of relationships and life, and being okay with that.
Yeah.
Being okay with those bumps and those nicks and bringing that out into the open.
Well, that's a part of shaping something, right? If you have a big ball of clay in front of you, it's not like you never get a fingernail in it. Like you are massaging it and moving it, and maybe you know where it's going. Usually I think people don't. There's just something evolves from that. But I love that analogy, because we do have this sort of walking on eggshells feeling, and the anxiety of early, internship hours or early private practice, when all of a sudden you're on your own and you're going, I have to do this perfectly, which is A, not possible, and
Right.
B, puts you in a place of like a lot of tension,
Right.
right? And what happens when you're feeling tense? I know for me, I'll, go more professional. Let me just be more professional, which then is
Yep.
more distance, which then isn't that connection. And so
Right.
there's so much awareness and self-awareness that's asked in this circumstance, right? That's required of us, I think.
Yeah.
And that can get really exhausting, but
Definitely.
it also is such a gift because you're constantly learning, right? There's no, oh, I'm done with this. It's like, oh, what was that? Something interesting is happening with me there, whether I'm feeling tired or I'm feeling activated or I'm, telling a certain story in my head. Like, so there's this ongoing process of learning that's available as a therapist, which is a lot of work and has a lot of benefits.
Yeah. There was something about the process of being open and being willing to be in the moment that just really attracted me, invited me.
Yeah.
There's a kind of a daringness there that I learned, I grew into, and it requires a lot of self-trust, which in turn, I think requires us to like and love ourselves.
Yeah.
Despite the fact that, we've all have hills and valleys in our lives, right? No one's perfect.
Sure.
But for me, being able to relate and to communicate and to be open and vulnerable with someone who's experienced trauma in and of itself is a healing. And it made me really look at, why I got into this field. And that's become one of the big questions for me. The importance of for people to understand, why are you doing this? Why did you get into this field? Well, so one of my guests said to me, we're not talking to me directly, but they were talking rhetorically, they said, how dare you think that you can, solve someone else's trauma? How dare you think that you can take away their pain? And I first heard that and I was like, well, but she said, oftentimes when someone comes to see you, they've been on a healing journey years before they got to you. This is their journey, and to be able to understand that and respect that and to, allow for things to unfold for that is really important.
It makes me think too about how when you do think it's your responsibility, how that becomes this heavy, impossible weight that you just carry. Oh, I'm not fixing it, or I can't, because it's not, the ball's not in your court. Like that ball is in the other court. And I think when we recognize that, again, and I know so many therapists right now with, 2 years of pandemic and Zoom fatigue and all these things are struggling with maintenance, right? With sustainability. And I think the more we can go, that's not my job to fix it. That's not my job to carry it or to take it and resolve it and give it back to you. That's not how this works. This is about being together while you find your way through that journey, and I'm right here with you, and let me pull out some tools here and there. Right. But it's ultimately, I think it's such an empowering shift too for someone to know that this is mine, right? And it's really not about what the therapist is doing to me, but that kind of goes back to the medical model, right? Of like, I'm going to go to the doctor, they're going to operate on my knee, and I'm going to be better.
Right. And they're going to have all the answers. And look, when I started, I thought I needed to have all the answers. I wanted to have all the answers. I needed that for myself. And it was an eye-opening experience for me.
And I love that you have this, 600 plus master therapists in the bag, conversations. You've asked all of them like their mistakes they've learned from and their favorite quotes and their tools and the books they recommend and all these things. And then it's like the take-home message is get to know yourself, be yourself, do your own work, show up, and have those tools in the bag. And we can talk about those too, right? Like, oh, I like this one, I like that. I mean, I love yoga and meditation, and I think yoga and meditation offer a ton of tools, particularly along the lines of self-awareness. But then it's like, okay, that it's not about, oh, I talked to 600 people and here's 600 tips, right? It's like,
well, Right. That's exactly the point that got me, because when I was younger, aside from being bullied, I thought I wasn't smart enough. And I thought I spent a lot of time trying to, I don't know, prove to myself that I was smart. And part of that process was, when I got to graduate school, okay, I need to do this and I need to do that. I need to take in all this information instead of really understanding exactly what you just said, is understanding and appreciating who I was and the importance of that within this within this field. So, right. It was really eye-opening for me. So wait a minute, it's not this intervention and that intervention and putting together. No, it's exactly that. But that's very challenging for a lot of us to do. And the thing is, when we encounter someone who is just themselves, who's in the moment, who's creative, who is vulnerable, we are blown away. Because it's magic. We are attracted to them, not in a sexual way, but just in a human way. They glow.
Because they're allowed to be themselves.
Right.
They're like, those blocks have been worked on, removed, or for whatever fortune weren't placed there.
Right.
Yeah. It's funny too. It makes me think of, my parents are both therapists. I think you interviewed my mom on your podcast too, right?
I love your mom.
She's amazing. My dad is too. He's less public with his work, but he's amazing too. And so one of the things that I think actually really helped me as a therapist is having therapy speak be the triggering thing for me. Somebody be like, say more about that. Or, how would you feel about washing the car, Lisa? I'd be like, I wouldn't feel very good about it, Dad. He'd be like, a parenting moment. What do I do here? But I think that really helped me, because when I started working with, youth coming out of juvenile hall, or, it's like this, we talk about the bullshit detector being on, right? It's like, don't feed me any lines. Don't read me something from a textbook. Don't stuff some intervention, into a group and think it's going to fix me. Like, be a real person and talk to me. And so I think not being willing to parrot those things was very helpful for me, and continues to be. And so I almost see, in a lot of people I'll support or mentor, there's this stage of really internalizing all the language and getting all the interventions down. There's getting it together. And then this is true in yoga too. And then you kind of go past it. Okay, now I've got all that. Right. That soothed my anxiety of what to do. Now I feel comfortable enough to just have a conversation with a person and be real with it, and ask the question maybe in the way that I would ask the question, instead of the way that was scripted in the video I watched with, whoever, master therapist.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love that. I remember, it brings to mind when I was working at that position I was working at, we had to deliver this assessment for early psychosis, and it was literally 40 pages long. We often work with another therapist, and these kids would come in. You take these calls from these therapists or their family members, and they talk about their child and these crazy off the wall, not even a crazy off the wall, but just severe symptoms.
Yeah.
And then they'd come in 2 weeks later or a week later, and they'd be sitting in the waiting room. This little kid.
Yeah.
You're like, oh my God, this little kid. Then they walk in the room, and we talk to them, and then we read this assessment, and you try to make it as less robotic as you can. I remember I was working with this one kid, and it just wasn't going anywhere. And I finally took the assessment and I just put it down on the table, as if to say, let's just forget this.
Yeah.
And that moment was such a shift, because it showed this kid that was not as important as connecting with that person. And for me, it was a relinquishing of needing to, almost in a sense, hide behind that assessment.
Yeah.
And it just was a major shift in terms of me understanding that it was me as a real person that needed to be there, not the need to read these questions. Of course, the content was important, but that process was a real eye opener for me.
The delivery too, right? And the delivery of an assessment is very formal. And you think of a kid and a lot of the power structures around a kid, an assessment's probably scary, right? I mean, might be a million other things too, but try to take that perspective. If I think of myself as like, you know, in a little body and all these big adults around, you're like, what are you asking me these questions for? And what does it mean? Whereas when an adult comes and says like, hey, how are you doing? What's going on? You know, or just like, I think play therapy is so valuable in this way too, because it just meets a kid where they are. Right. I really appreciate this, like step away from the formality of therapy and counseling and the step into the self-reflection piece of it. And I know you also really value all these techniques and theories. I mean, your podcast is dedicated to so much of that, but it's this like both and like they have to exist together. And it sounds to me almost like this, the self piece is the foundation, right? And then anything else that comes, you know, whether it's EMDR or neurofeedback or yoga, meditation, you know, all the alphabet soup of different therapies that we could be trained in, like that kind of has to sit on top of, it does have to sit on top of some interpersonal foundation. And if it doesn't, it just falls flat, right? It's like reading the paper to the kid and saying like, let's assess your symptoms rather than putting it down, looking them in the eye and just being like, hi, how are you?
Exactly. Yeah. And that's exactly what I did. I put that down and I just was like, I went off script and I said like, look, you know, Tom, whatever the kid's name was, what are those, what is it that your parents out there are not getting that the other therapists that you saw before you came in here, what are they not getting? You know, just this whole shift allowed me to communicate. The thing that's exciting to me about all this, Lisa, is that we're all different and we're all going to communicate with someone differently, but hopefully authentically, you know, in our different ways, in our unique ways. And it's like, as I often say, you know, authenticity isn't one point that everyone is going to. We each have different points. We each have different, you know, our journey to authenticity is going to look different, you know, and that's such a cool thing. But I think it's so important for us, for each of us to find out what that is and to honor that.
Yeah. You sound like such a yogi right now. I have to say.
You know, I did this so like the wrong way, you know, and someone might say, well, it wasn't the wrong way, Guy. It's the way that you had to find to get there. But it was the wrong, I was so naive, you know, I thought I needed to be, you know, my idea of a therapist. And, you know, like I said before, I needed to shove all this information, this knowledge in my head. And instead I just didn't honor who I was.
Yeah. It was all frosting, no cake.
Exactly. There's your title right there. Guy Macpherson, all frosting, no cake. Oh,
no, you got the cake. You figured it out, right? So it was in verse. You made the frosting first and you went, what do I put this on?
That's funny.
Oh, let me pay attention to the cake first. I know I was joking with calling you a yogi, but have you ever done any like yoga meditation with clients or personally? Is that something?
No. I mean, I've attended yoga classes, but I haven't pursued it formally at all.
It's just so much of the self-awareness sounds like mindfulness practices. I know there's millions of mindfulness practices out there, but it's interesting too then how like the mindfulness approach can just find its way in, right? Like, I need to be self-aware and notice what's coming from me and self-reflect, and that really improves. It doesn't have to be, you know, from a certain lineage or teacher. It's just a natural process that helps, right, in this profession.
Another thing that to me is really exciting is that when I talk or when I'm on my podcast and I'm interviewing guests, I can share how I screwed it up or how I feel I screwed it up, you know, how I feel or how I felt when I was just getting into graduate school. And, you know, again, going back to school at 36, having been in therapy and thinking that, well, I already did that. I've gone to therapy. I already got that figured out. Check. But no, I didn't.
And so that really launched a process. Well, everyone coming to you and getting advice, and then you going, oh, okay, well, and you had to sort of figure out, oh, I am my instrument, right? Like I have to do some of this work in an ongoing way in order to, and I think, awareness sort of gets revealed to us over time. We can live 10 years of something. I was just interviewing Gabby Bernstein, and she talks about her, and I know she went on your podcast too. She talks about how, she was teaching spiritual practices for years, and they were life-saving for her and are for many people, and then started to recognize how even that was coping. It was coping with a trauma that she wasn't aware of behind the scenes. So wonderful that those practices were such a service, but there was an awareness that just wasn't there until it was there. Right. Yeah. So I think sometimes that's where, versus therapy, check, done. Like maybe for one piece of life or one experience, or, maybe you don't feel like you need to go for that certain trauma or that grief or whatever it is, but life is ongoing, and self-reflection and growth are ongoing. And so, I have heard that too. And I'm, in the process of teaching in some classes in my old degree program. And, I hear people say, oh, I want to be a counselor. Do you think I should go to counseling? And I'm like, yes, emphatically, yes, absolutely. And stay in it. It doesn't mean you have to see the same therapist for, 40 years, but keep digging, right? Keep digging for what's coming up for you. How are you responding? And that's kind of scary. I think we want to have this like checkbox approach. Now I'm a therapist and I'm done.
Right.
But the beauty of it is you get to keep growing.
I remember the first supervisor I had, I walked into her office and I was working with people in like an Alzheimer's situation. So mostly elderly people. And here I was fresh off of, I don't know, level 1 or level 2 of sensory motor psychotherapy training, and had all this, exciting knowledge. And I was so frustrated. I went into her office and I was so frustrated. And I said to her, she said, what's wrong? I said, my clients are not listening to me. They're not listening to what I'm telling them to do. And she said, why the hell do you think your clients need to listen to you? What makes you think that they... And I was like, well, aren't they supposed... this whole thing I had, it just flipped on its head. Right. Lisa, the thing for me is, and I think why this is so exciting to me, is it because I think what I'm talking about is an invitation for each of us to just be who we are. And it sounds so easy, and it sounds simple, but it's not, because so much of our stuff gets in the way. And when, people are working with people who've been impacted by trauma, interpersonal trauma, all of that authenticity and vulnerability has oftentimes been ripped from them. And when they encounter someone who is embodying that can be a very healing process and experience.
I so love and appreciate what you're sharing. And it's interesting because I was thinking, there's going to be these moments, what do you call them? Like light bulb moments of an intervention or something that, and it's all self-reflective, and it's all it's almost like permission, right? To just be who you are. Right. And it's interesting because I think as a licensed therapist, and I know some people who work in different healing fields who are like, I don't want to be a licensed therapist because I feel like it's going to limit me feeling comfortable expressing who I am, right? Like it puts them into a professional box in their minds, at least, that feels too restrictive. So, I mean, there's a lot of ways to support healing and practice healing, but whatever the modality or the license or the, angle, I would agree with you that when someone has done work that allows them to be comfortable in their own skin, it's attractive, right? We go, this feels comfortable to me. This feels safe to me. I don't have to wonder when the other shoe's going to drop, or be curious about who this person really is. And it even makes me think of my graduate school advisor, who I read some of his writing. I met him in person and I was like, done, let's go. Like, I want to learn from you because you are comfortable with yourself, and you're comfortable saying the word love at Harvard. You're comfortable talking about what this feels like for you to be a support person. And that's what I want to learn from. What does it feel like for you? How do you do it? Like, not because I'm going to emulate that, because also like in a yoga setting, people try to teach like their teachers and it just doesn't work. Not because I'm going to try to be you, but because there's a comfort there that makes me go, okay, so I can do that too. Right. And I think whether it's a teacher student or mentor or advisor or therapist and client, there is this sort of, neuroception, we might call it, or awareness of, I get to be myself and I get to tell the truth if I want to, verbally even. And that's so freeing. And so much trauma has this like shame piece and things you can't say and things that are too much or would make you a bad person. And when we can just go, oh yeah, I made a mistake. Oh yeah, that was embarrassing. Oh yeah, that was a sticky situation. But it doesn't sort of touch this is still me and that's okay. Right.
Yeah. That's it. I love it.
Yes.
That to me, it gets me going.
Yeah.
It really does.
Yeah.
Because it constantly gives me the invitation to be myself, to be okay with all my, unique little foibles and whatever they are, the embarrassments and shames and stuff like that. But it's awesome to me. And for me, getting to bring people on the podcast who know that. And someone I interviewed, who said, it's not a matter of when you're going to get triggered as a therapist, or if rather, it's when it's going to happen, and hopefully you've done the work before you step into that office.
Yeah. To know, I'm triggered and this is where I can go with that.
Right.
Yeah. And then there's so much reward on working through that. Right. Yeah. So much wisdom, and I so appreciate it, Guy. I just have one more kind of line of questioning. People are having a rough time for a variety of reasons, and we're coming out of 2 years of social distancing and a lot of loss. And what would you say to someone who's just really in it right now? Kind of like that person you helped on the wilderness expedition. What tools might you direct them to? And I'm kind of thinking already in my head, you're probably not going to direct them to tools. You're going to direct them to people. You're going to direct them to a person.
Right.
But what do you have any thoughts on, like, if someone's just like, I'm overwhelmed, I don't know where to go, I'm struggling, what do I do?
Reach out to someone else. Reach out to people who will have your back, who will listen to you. I think it's hard for a lot of us to reach out and say, you know what, this whole pandemic thing is getting me down, but we need to do it because it sucks. It's really, really hard. And the more we think about it, the harder it is. Because I think now for myself, I've even gotten to this quasi-stability, but you start reading the news and, this whole Russian thing is going on.
It doesn't stop. Yeah.
It doesn't stop.
It's not just the pandemic.
It's not. Yeah. And I think it's very easy for us to hold that in because we think that, well, who wants to hear us complain? Who wants to hear us talk about our problems? But I think we need to support each other and be willing to reach out.
Yeah. Would you say anything different to therapists?
Who are going through the same thing?
Who are going through the same thing and are feeling maybe burnt out or compassion fatigue?
I think I would say really reach out, because I think for
reach
therapists,
out to 10 people.
For therapists, it can even be harder.
Yeah.
Because therapists are supposed to have it together. And I think there might even be more shame in feeling like you've just collapsed as a puddle on the floor. You don't have it together. And I think, in a lot of the interviews I've done, I so appreciate when I talk to someone who has a lot of experience and they're nonchalantly say, a lot of times I don't know what the hell's going on.
Yeah.
I don't have it all figured out.
Oh, I loved it when my therapist said that to me. He's like, half the time, I don't know what's going to happen. And
yeah.
like, thank you.
It's very easy to, from the outside, look at them and say, oh my God, they've done this and they've done that. But it's just, again, it comes back to being a human. And as one of my guests, Manuela Mishka-Reed, said, human beingness, being willing to have that and to express that human beingness with all of its ups and downs and hills and valleys.
Yeah. Suzanne, another guest on this podcast, talked about human being versus human doing. And that, I feel like that captures too what you're talking about in terms of, the cake and the frosting. Like being is the cake and doing is the frosting. But it's like, it's more important to be and to be in this human beingness than to fix something, to do something, to problem solve, right? There's a time and a place. You put that on at the end and sprinkles and all that. But there's a center to it that almost, you talk about your journey being sort of inverse, but I think the field sort of sets you up that way too, right? It's not like there's all this personal development and then graduate school. Right. So I don't think you're alone in feeling like, oh, wait, I've got to rebuild this foundation. No one really talked about it, right? You can figure it out on your own. And so I'm curious too, if there's anything you would say to people who are interested in going into mental health right now. Maybe they're going into their bachelor's studies or their master's or thinking about going back to grad school and being a psychologist. What would you say to them?
I would say, go for it. But I would also say, get clear on your why. Why are you doing that? And not that there's any judgment in that, but just to become aware of what's behind that desire to do it. Most of the people that have had on my podcast have experienced trauma of one kind of another. Not everyone, but certainly 99% of them really. But just get clear on what that is and understand that learning the importance of you being you is crucial and being okay with that. And that's such a huge thing. We spend our lives doing that.
And it's something you also do on your podcast and encourage other people to do on their podcast. So yeah, I really appreciate that. Thank you so much, Guy, for all of the wisdom downloaded. And, actually I want to ask you one more thing before we wrap up. What is giving you hope right now? Given there's all these kinds of things happening in the world, but what gives you hope?
Oh, that's a really good question. It sounds so cheesy.
I love it. Bring it. No judgment.
When I look at my 6-year-old daughter and just see her moving in creativity, living in creativity, living in moment to moment, that gives me hope. Yeah. And that sounds so crazy. I've heard other people say that and I was like, dude, shut up. But
it's true.
That is hopeful to me. That is genuineness. That is love. Love embodied. That's very hopeful to me. It's reminds me to get out of my own way. Look, I don't have all this stuff figured out by any sense of the imagination. I'm not some friggin' Zen master, but I can appreciate it in other people out there. I see it and I'm like, yes, that's it. That.
And that freedom and that flow and that, it fits exactly with everything we've been talking about, just being yourself, right? And allowing the creativity to move through, which we end up with these blocks and questions and doubts. And, it's like, it makes me think of summertime too as a kid, like 6-year-old summer, where you're just like, I mean, if you'd been in school, you're on break or whatever, and it's just like, you get to just go make something out of nothing, go play in the mud, go like find something new you're into and get really into it, right? Like do all the braiding or all the Legos or all the whatever thing. And it's just this flow of creativity that it's not for some endpoint, right? It's play too.
Right. There's power in that. There's beauty in that. I think that's the gift we can give to other people in our lives. Our willingness to be ourselves. That's so healing.
Yeah. So beautiful. And again, I just so appreciate you, Guy, for everything you've done, for inviting me on your podcast, for hosting 600 plus trauma therapists on your podcast, and for, sharing everything you've learned along the way so authentically, so vulnerably, so clearly too, right? You articulate it really well. And I think people listening, whether they're going through it or they're wanting to be a therapist or they've been a therapist for a long time and they're just, trying to keep up with the pace and the demand, I think all of this is just really helpful and gives us permission, not that we need it from some outside place, but sometimes we need to hear it from some outside place. Like, oh yeah, just come back to who are you and who do you want to be in the world and for yourself, and follow that, listen to that. Right. It's
I appreciate
kind of recentering.
That. Thank you. I really appreciate you saying that. Your podcast is awesome. You are awesome. Come on, you're such a natural. Give me a break.
Thank you. I love it. It's so much fun. So where can people find you? Your podcast, your program, your website?
Traumatherapistpodcast.com. Everything's there. Email me. I love talking to people. Yep.
Download all 600 episodes and just binge on them. I think I'm like number 22 and then number like 462 or something. I don't know. I can't remember. But maybe I'll come back on. Maybe you'll come back on here. We'll keep the conversation going.
Definitely.
Right.
Lisa,
Thanks
thank you so much,
Guy.
It was a pleasure.
Thanks so much for listening. My hope is that you walk away from these episodes feeling supported and like you have a place to come to find the hope and inspiration you need to take your next small step forward. I do want to make sure it's clear that this podcast isn't offering any prescriptions. It's not advice or any kind of diagnosis. Your decisions are in your hands, and we encourage you to consult with any relevant healthcare professionals you may need to support you through your unique path of healing. For more information and resources, please visit my website, howwecanheal.com. There, you'll find tons of helpful resources and the full transcript of each show. You can also click the podcast menu to submit requests for upcoming topics and guests. Before we wrap, I want to send thanks to our guests today, to Christine O'Donnell and Celine Baumgartner of Bright-Sided Podcasting, and to everyone who helped support this podcast, directly and indirectly. Alex, thanks for taking the dogs out while I record. I'd also like to give a shout out to my brother Matt. He passed away in 2002. He wrote this music and recorded it, and it makes my heart so happy to share it with you now.